welcome to this edition of Let's Talk Law. I'm Anusha Soni. With us, we have a guest today who needs no introduction, Justice Indhu Malhotra. Her stellar career at the bar and bench is very well known. She was the first woman to be elevated directly from the bar to the Supreme Court of India, and her judgments, her contribution to jurisprudence in this country is very well known. She continues to contribute to the world of arbitration and mediation. Her commentaries on ADR, on different forms of arbitration that exist, is very well recognized. And even recently, there is a very special course that has been designed by her at the National Law University in Delhi. She is with us today to speak about various facets of her journey, including this course, and how this course helps India to leverage its position at the global platform. Ma'am, thank you so much for speaking to us today.
Thank you.
I want to begin by understanding the course that is launched recently at NLU in Delhi. And what is the purpose of this course? Why did you think that it was important for us to have a course of this nature?
Well, I have, been doing arbitrations for several years and I've been quite deep into it. And, as per UNCTAD, India is the most sued country in the world, by foreign investors. And these cases go on, for years to come. And the amounts involved run into billions of dollars.
Yeah.
So as India grows, its economy grows into 3 trillion and, further into a 5 trillion scenario, we certainly don't want these kind of cases being foisted on us, as also we want effective representation. Today, there is a lack of talent. There are very few lawyers who, specialize in these areas. And I thought it was very important to start developing, training lawyers, training civil servants who are the gatekeepers where these cases are filed in the ministries. How are they to deal with it? So we wanted to go right to the grassroots, start training civil servants and lawyers. So we've opened this course. Basically, it's a specialized diploma certificate course. It's a postgraduate course because you have to have an elementary knowledge of law before you do the course. And this course is specialized. It has 2 modules. The first module is on international commercial arbitration. The second module is on investment treaty arbitration. So there are very few people actually who are practicing in the country who are aware of investment treaty arbitration, because that's actually arbitration without privity. There is no privity. There is the contracting parties haven't signed an agreement. The agreement is between 2 sovereign countries, and the foreign investors seek protections under those treaties. So the foreign investor and the host state don't have an agreement between them. So what they do is that they file a claim, then it goes before a tribunal, the tribunal adjudicates upon it, and sometimes huge amounts are involved.
Ma'am, I want to hold on to that thought. It's very interesting you say India is the most sued country in the world. Why so? Why are we most sued country? Is our treaties not designed very well? Or the people who are working around these treaties not equipped to understand the legalities around it? What exactly is the loophole?
There are various loopholes at various levels. The first loophole I feel is that the model of treaties from which these disputes are arising was actually based on the Western model when we first started entering into treaties, which was in 1994 with the United Kingdom. So we just followed the Western model because we were not so conversant with it. We wanted to get, foreign investment, foreign technology, and the earlier agreements we had where we really they found oil wells, that I'm giving you by way of illustration. So we needed technology. We needed foreign direct investment also. So therefore, India started entering into these treaties, and we, I think, entered into approximately 66 treaties, and everything went on merrily till 2011. 2011, India really got its first adverse award, and that is well known as the White Industries case, where what had happened was that White Industries had filed an international commercial arbitration. They got an award in their favor. They came to India to come and enforce it. And Coal India, which was the PSU whom they were fighting, had filed they had filed objections to the award. They had done, so they were basically saying that you can't enforce it for whatever reasons. So there were two parallel proceedings going on. One was in the Delhi High Court and one was in the Calcutta High Court. Now the matters were pending for some time. Then they came to the Supreme Court. In the Supreme Court, the matter got tagged on to the Balco Group of Industries case. And so it was pending for 9 years. So now what they turned around and did was they invoked the investment treaty, saying that India doesn't have effective legal means of adjudicating disputes expeditiously, so we are entitled to relief. And that award came to be passed against the government. Government means Republic of India, because it's against a sovereign country. And then India did pay the amount, but it was a big turning point. India went ahead in 2016 and terminated almost all its bilateral investment treaties. And then they said, we need to take a relook at the entire system. So they came out now with another model, which was the 2016 model. It hasn't been very popular because I think it's become a little over defensive, that we won't go to foreign tribunals, we'll have to exhaust local remedies, etc. So not been very highly subscribed. But the problem, why is India sued so much, is because the claims are continuing to be filed under the terminated BITs, because those BITs had periods of sunset period, which is 15 years, that the treaty, even though it's terminated, would continue to operate for another 15 years. So under those treaties, there are claims being filed, time and again, and then they file multiple proceedings. Now, another issue which has arisen is that, if they are unable to enforce it in India on grounds, very exceptional grounds, maybe of fraud or corruption, then they go and, sell the award overseas to hedge funders who start filing enforcement proceedings against India in multiple jurisdictions. So it's actually a matter of great national concern, and therefore capacity building is important. And you see, what is important, which I found in a lot of jurisdictions, because I've been studying a lot on it, is that all the countries have really honed their systems. They have got a centralized system in place. They have an SOP in place, that if a notice comes, how do you deal with it from that point onwards? So therefore, civil servants, being the gatekeepers, they are the ones who first receive the notice. Now, how should it be dealt with?
So these are the civil servants who are going to be trained under this program.
That's
along
right.
With the young generation.
That's right. So there are civil servants from the ministries, there are civil servants from the PSUs, all the government agencies, central government, state government. We want to start training them. So we are starting a course with just 40 candidates, and we hope to get 20 from government departments and 20 from lawyers, because we also want to build a layer of junior lawyers who learn how to instruct counsel, because normally we are engaging foreign law firms, etc. So we want to start developing legal expertise in our country.
Ma'am, you spoke about the fact how judiciary plays a very important role, and in fact, when it's the government of the country, it's the sovereign which is being sued, judiciary becomes an important stakeholder. The way government is dealing with it becomes an important stakeholder. So it's not an adversarial relationship that exists between the two. What kind of support perhaps could be needed from the side of the government, or is the government sensitive to the kind of concerns that you're raising right now?
Government is extremely concerned. Actually, the judiciary was also, a lot of judges were under the impression that how can we be, subjected to these kind of proceedings. But what has to be understood is that this is not a dispute between two private parties. It is a dispute, it's a claim which is made against the Republic of India. And the Republic of India comprises of its three wings: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. And therefore, the judiciary also has to be sensitized on this, and that has to be done probably through the national judicial academies to make them more aware of that the number of cases which are being filed. And the only ground which is really taken against the judiciary is that it's an overpressured judiciary and very slow to move.
Do we mean special courts for matters of this nature, or special wings within the courts to deal with matters of this nature?
My thinking is, and my suggestion is, that there should be a specialized bench in the high courts and the Supreme Court only, because international commercial arbitrations, they are dealt only with at the High Court level and Supreme Court after the 2015 amendment. Prior to the 2015 amendment, matters used to go to district courts, etc., which had jurisdiction. But that has now come to an end because the definition of court has been amended by in the 2015, saying that the High Court concerned will have exclusive jurisdiction. So I believe that in every High Court, there should be one bench continuously disposing of commercial disputes, particularly international commercial disputes, because we can't afford to have any adverse claims on this ground. And therefore, quick disposal by a specialized bench, and I think even the judges need to be trained on these issues, as to what is an investment treaty claim, how are they to be dealt with, etc. I think that and that can happen through exchange programs with other countries. It can happen through, well-known arbitral institutions which can come for a weekend course. So it's, matter of familiarizing.
Sure, sure. Ma'am, you interestingly pointed out that the government is very concerned about this. And in fact, the present government and the Prime Minister has repeatedly spoken about the fact how India needs to be the world leader. It's a growing economy. We are a sweet spot for the world. The fact that we face this tough time at the international court, so we are the most sued country. How does it affect the business sentiment of the country? Because it becomes a very important part of how dispute resolution is happening between companies, between countries. What has been your experience?
To tell you honestly, having been a part of the judiciary, I do believe, and I carefully, do go through most of the judgments. India is certainly a pro-arbitration, hub. There are hardly any awards where we refuse enforcement. They are always enforced. It's in very exceptional cases where fraud and corruption is proved that we cannot enforce them. And so now to circumvent that, what the hedge funders do is they buy the award in the secondary market and go to different jurisdictions. So that has become a big issue. The second main issue actually, which is I think the most troublesome, is I think India has to terminate the sunset clauses. And that can be done. It is being done by other jurisdictions, and that's what I think the government must address. It must be the ground for starting negotiations that we terminate these sunset clauses, because if they go on for 15 years, 2017 when we terminated most, that will take us to 2032. So we can't have this, this onslaught of claims being filed under the terminated BITs. And I think there is a lot of thinking worldwide where there's a lot of resentment to these kind of claims, because there were a lot of smaller economies which got completely battered, while trying to defend themselves, because they are very, very expensive and they go on for years.
Ma'am, the Asia Pacific region, say a country like Singapore, has been, taking various steps to pitch itself as the next arbitration hub. Various leaders, including the Prime Minister, the government, various judges, including you, have spoken about the scope, how India can also be a leader in this aspect. When it comes to India becoming the arbitration hub, what are the strengths we have, and more importantly, what are the weaknesses we have if we really want to grow in this particular area?
So, I think India is really well suited today, because frankly speaking, the maximum investment is happening in this country, because they feel that it's a great country where the growth of the economy has been really good, and with the infrastructure developing, construction contracts are being entered into to develop the infrastructure. Now, the only issue which I find is a stumbling block is that people feel that if India is the seat of arbitration, it takes much too long for them to get enforcement, because they feel that it is true.
It is true.
It is true. It is true.
And how can we correct that?
That is what I feel. It can be corrected. It is not so hard. It is just designating one special bench in every court, and those judges should continuously be trained. With respect to, they should be made aware that if we don't dispose them off early, we will be the country has to pay for it. It goes out of the taxpayer's pocket.
Yes.
So that is what has to be done. I understand and I know how hard it is, because the Indian judiciary is actually the most overburdened. we are catering to a 1.4 billion or 1.4 billion, citizens. So of course and then, we can't also neglect, there are so many important human issues, etc. There is labor, there's matrimonial disputes, but one special bench should be trained actively by the courts every few months, so that we can churn them. And I think the roster shouldn't change too frequently, because the training then goes, let them at least hold the roster for 1 year and keep disposing of, because long dates and all should not be given. For international commercial disputes, we have to fast track. These are corporate disputes.
You've spoken about it earlier. I remember at the launch of the program that how judicial delays is something that the judiciary should become more and more sensitive to, especially at the level of the high courts. And perhaps that's a gap that can be bridged easily.
Well, it is tough because, we are very overburdened, but that bench should not be given any other work. They should be finishing these matters. They should not be allowed to pend. That is the first point. Second is, if there's an international commercial arbitration particularly, and it's seated in India, then the Section 11, the appointment process, has to be expedited very fast. In fact, I think out of most of the high courts, Delhi High Court has been outstanding. The minute a party moves the court for interim relief, they say, let the arbitration start, and, go and obtain your interim relief from the...
And that model can be replicated in different...
Yes, yes. It's not difficult. We just need to be more focused, and we have to, train also our judiciary that, become alert to this situation. Otherwise, you have to pay a lot. The billions of dollars, there's so many countries, and their entire South Africa, EU, they have all terminated their BITs. They don't want that Western model anymore, because it's actually like an economic imperialism.
Yes, yes. Ma'am, you spoke about judiciary, judges. I also want to briefly touch upon why it is important to train the next generation of lawyers and the young bar members that you see around you. What is the potential that they hold, especially when it comes to protecting the sovereign interests or the kind of bar that they're going to make up in the years to come?
I think there is a huge prospect. We have the brightest lawyers in our country, and who are doing extremely well. Only thing is that they all go either towards litigation, and of late more towards the corporate sector. But this area, we are lacking talent, because more people haven't come in. And that's why we are starting this course. We need to start the first generation of young lawyers who will start giving instructions to attorneys who are engaged from overseas until the bar grows. It's very, very important. It's critical for our country.
Yeah. Ma'am, we're also speaking in a week when it's the International Women's Day. And whenever it's a conversation with you, I cannot help but ask you. It's a heartening trend that we're seeing more and more women enroll into law schools, wanting to become lawyers and be a part of the bar in the bench. But I also don't want to deny it, knowing as a woman that for in any profession, it's far more difficult for a woman to make her mark. To the women in this generation, what would you like to tell from your story? What is it that they can pick up? I'm sure there's a lot, but what is it that they can pick up as they move forward? Because a lot of students watch these podcasts, hoping to learn from you and your experience.
So it's like this, that when I had joined the bar, I think in the Supreme Court, we have all of 8 women, who are practicing. But believe me, the journey hasn't been so hard. If you are focused and you are at your workplace during designated hours and you discharge your work, the work regenerates from unknown sources. That's been my experience. I feel you have to be focused, you have to be timely and punctual in discharging your work. Believe me, work grows, and it grows by word of mouth in the legal profession as in any other profession. People see your performance in court, they see your hardworking. If you're, if you're ready with your matter, that's how you grow. And I've grown like that, from brief by brief, actually.
Ma'am, we were all very elated. I used to cover Supreme Court that time as a correspondent when you were elevated to the Supreme Court of India as a judge. And we hope to see more and more women judges in the Supreme Court. But the number of women judges in our country is still very less. This is a concern that various chief justices have spoken about in the past. Is it a systemic issue, or is it an issue that we don't have enough number of women at the bar so that they can be elevated to the bench?
I would agree with the latter. Because first, let me tell you one thing. I really don't go on the gender issue, because I'll tell you why. when you are going to be dispensing justice, you are holding a public office. And your basics must be in place, your knowledge, your competence. Why it's taking long? It's neither systemic, there's no gender bias, I would put it. I would put it to this, that women have taken to the legal profession much later than men, because it's a difficult profession, it's a very demanding profession. I mean, you're at it as many hours as men are. I mean, 12, 14 hours a day. So it's a very demanding profession. It's a jealous profession, as they call it.
It's the jealous profession.
Yeah, a jealous profession, because it takes away all your time. Actually,
Yes.
so it possesses you, and it's only if you work with dedication that you'll grow and prosper. So that is the first part, and I think women started taking to law much later. So it's taking time. Like, for instance, one of the judges of Supreme Court was saying that Justice Hema Kohli retired, so where there is no other woman who has yet finished 10 years, and that is the minimum number of years for you to be considered for elevation to Supreme Court. So I think it's growing. It's growing in every court. Earlier we had just one, woman judge. Now it's been 3. So I think that gender bias isn't there, but I feel you can't, just have quotas. It has to be competence based, whether it's men or whether it's women. And I don't have that blind issue that, just because you're a woman.
You've always been very, very vocal about it, that everything cannot be viewed in gender binaries, and there is a context to everything. But rightly said, there should be no quotas. Various bar associations are talking about quotas, maybe at the bar level, at the bar leadership level. At that level, do you think that's an acceptable idea?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Because see, bar associations, to say that the post of a president should be only for a woman, now that doesn't work. These are elected, associations. And, nowhere can you have these kind of reservations. It doesn't work like that. They're elected posts. And even if you say, it should be only a woman, but why? There's no rationale to it. So we shouldn't carry, gender bias for it to be something populist. It should be something fair. And, like, for instance, it's a small thing, but I think we shouldn't, make the entire system so perverted also. We must support women. Like, for instance, for women lawyers, I know my juniors, when they became mothers, they used to actually leave their children in the cars. Actually, for 8 hours, the air conditioner would be going on in the heat, and they would, go between matters, see the little baby and come back. Then we all started working towards having creches in the colleges, in the And then we got onto with the Vishakha, because I was involved in framing the guidelines. They were, members of the bar, members of the bench. There was the Attorney General. All of us sat down in the afternoon in the Chief's Court, and we framed, those regulations, which came, of course, out of the Vishakha judgment. But it was, the guidelines were framed, by all of us, and now it's got the sanctity of law. I think that has helped a lot. So you have to help women like that, help them in education, but not by creating quotas. Like, for instance, I was just going to mention to you, there was someone who, called me, can you help with the admission of the child? And, but the boy, it's a male child. So what do? He loses out 10 marks. So I said, why? They said, because girls are today given preference. I said, now we can't, swing the pendulum the other way. There has to be a balance. You can't say, just because I've had a girl child, now 10 marks more. It becomes hard also on the male child, to get admission into good institutions. You want the whole population to grow. So we shouldn't be populist. I'm against populism. Absolutely. Absolutely.
There was a very interesting story today I read in a newspaper on the occasion of International Women's Day. And at the panchayat level, we have quotas for women, right? But it was actually the 5 husbands of the elected sarpanch who took oath as the sarpanch. And it's a known practice, but the video became viral. So it attracted a lot of attention. But you're right that when you create those kind of quotas, without a real change on the ground, it gives to this kind of deformity that comes into the system.
Yeah.
Perhaps that can be very dangerous for judiciary.
That's true. In the judiciary, I definitely don't believe in quotas. I feel it should be competence, it should be knowledge, it should be your performance, your disposals, You know, whether as a lawyer, you know, how effectively you have built up a practice, you know, how do you present the case of your client before the court. As a judge from the High Court to the Supreme Court, the performance, you know, the quality of your judgments. In fact, they used to come to us because when you're in the Supreme Court, then you get, you know, when additional judges have to be confirmed in the High Court. So their judgments, 10 judgments of each judge comes. So you see, you know, the amount of time they've taken, whether they've followed the law correctly, the quality of judgment. So that's how you judge.
Yeah.
Not on the basis of woman judge, man judge. For me, I think I'm blindfolded. I actually am. I feel we should have a fair system of dispensing justice.
Yes. Ma'am, my last point to you is the ongoing debate, I believe, which will persist for the years to come, is about the appointment of judges in this country. You very closely observed the system. It has changed or evolved from what it was in the 90s to now, especially ever since the NJC judgment. But there is much, much more that needs to be done in terms of bringing more transparency, accountability, or it becoming more inclusive. Any suggestions on that front?
Well, I was for the NJAC.
Yes.
I was for the NJAC, and I think we do need to get a system in place, which is, you know, we just can't have it a closed house thing with the 5 senior most judges deciding who should, you know, be elevated and not. I think there has to
That
be.
reform did not see the light of the day. It was only Justice Chela Mishra dissenting
Yeah.
judgment. But you believe we need a system?
I certainly believe that. And there has to be greater transparency. I'm all for the NJAC. I feel that's very important.
And the present system as it exists right now, ma'am, is there any way to make it more transparent?
It's difficult.
It's difficult. It's a collegium in the present form
Yeah.
because the Supreme Court has tried to change it so many times and make it more transparent, but it hasn't been consistent.
It's actually very difficult because, you know, you can't really in public decide that, you know, which candidate is better than the other or, you know, quality of judgments.
Where there are elections.
Yeah. So our system is entirely different. I don't believe in it being made public because, you know, you can't be denigrating anyone else's performance because it has its own, you know, repercussions. And you don't want that. You know, you want every judge to be respected, otherwise they'll be undermined in their performance. But you may select someone on grounds of competence, skill, knowledge, or their contribution, you know, whether you can contribute in many ways.
Yeah. Well, ma'am, here's hoping that our system becomes more transparent in the days to come. That's good for democracy. And congratulations on starting that wonderful course at
Thank you.
It really breeds that new generation of lawyers that can effectively contribute to nation building, development, I think, in a very, very real way.
Yeah.
And we will continue to follow your journey very, very closely.
Thank
so much
you.
for your time.
Thank you.